Premier Danielle Smith is hitting the road this summer. To hear directly from Albertans, she'll be chairing a panel of experts and community members. Their goal, to send a message to the Prime Minister about the province's role in Canada.
Canada has faced political standoffs before, but what Premier Danielle Smith is pushing right now, it feels different. It feels bigger. Is Alberta quietly setting the stage to topple Ottawa's grip on the provinces, piece by piece? This isn't some fringe conspiracy. In July 2025, Smith publicly called for constitutional talks among provincial premiers, the first serious push of its kind since the failed Charlottetown Accord in 1992. On paper, it's just a discussion about provincial autonomy. But beneath the polite language, critics see something else, a coordinated power shift that could redraw Canada's political map.
The Alberta Next panel will put Albertans in the driver's seat. It will give them the rightful opportunity to decide how Alberta can become stronger and more sovereign within a united Canada.
And Smith isn't making this move in a vacuum. She's already shaken Canada's energy politics with her plan for a privately funded 1 million barrel a day oil pipeline straight to British Columbia's northwest coast. Now, she's going after something even bigger than pipelines. She's going after the very rules that define who gets to control Canada's future. Smith never uses the word secession. She doesn't need to. Her message is sharp enough. Alberta should replace the RCMP with a fully provincial police force. Alberta should pull out of the Canada Pension Plan, CPP, building its own pension system run by Albertans, for Albertans. Alberta should take direct control of more tax revenues, cutting Ottawa out as much as possible. Individually, these ideas aren't new, but Smith isn't treating them as isolated reforms. She's packaging them as a constitutional fight, and she's calling on other provinces to join her. Political insiders say the timing is no accident. Western anger against Ottawa has been simmering for years, boiling over as federal regulators killed project after project. Keystone XL, Energy East, Northern Gateway, costing billions in lost investment. Smith is stepping into that anger and turning it into something more dangerous, a movement. The response from the West was immediate. Saskatchewan and Manitoba lined up behind Smith almost overnight. Both provinces have long complained about Ottawa's unfair transfer payments and tight grip on resource development. British Columbia is still hesitating, but insiders say Premier David Eby has privately admitted he's open to listening if the talks remain privately funded and don't carry federal backlash. That's enough to terrify Ottawa. Because if BC steps in, Ottawa could find itself politically cornered in its own country, facing a united Western bloc controlling much of Canada's energy and agriculture. One Saskatchewan official, speaking off the record, summed it up bluntly: if this convention succeeds, we won't need Ottawa's permission to run our provinces anymore. That single sentence, already making headlines, sparked a wave of speculation. Is Canada still a united country, or already just a loose collection of provinces pretending to be one? Underneath all the polite constitutional language, this is about power. And power, in Canada, means oil. Alberta controls 165 billion barrels of recoverable oil, worth nearly $9 trillion at current prices. Ottawa's environmental rules and regulatory delays have left much of it trapped, cutting Canada out of billions in revenue every year.
So much has been made of our relationship here in British Columbia with Alberta at the time. Best of friends, travel buddies, those who share the Rocky Mountains, at times fierce enemies, largely around politics, specifically when it comes to oil.
Smith's answer? Build Alberta's own future, without federal money, without federal approval. Her pipeline plan, fully funded by private investors and Indigenous equity, is already moving forward. If it works, it will prove something Ottawa dreads, that provinces don't need the federal government to build generational wealth. Some analysts have already called this the opening act of an oil-fueled power revolution. Ottawa can tighten its rules all at once, but Alberta now has both the money and the political will to break free. Smith insists this is not about separation. She uses phrases like provincial freedom and taking responsibility for our own future. But many of the people showing up at her Alberta Next town halls are longtime Wexit supporters, Western separatists who openly dream of cutting Alberta out of Confederation entirely. That's why her constitutional push feels so dangerous to Ottawa. Even if Smith isn't planning Wexit herself, she's giving separatists a legitimate political pathway to push for it. And Smith's careful ambiguity only fuels the fire. Is she just bargaining for better deals with Ottawa, or quietly laying the groundwork for Alberta to go its own way? No one can say for sure. And that uncertainty is exactly what's making this debate explode.
embraced by other Indigenous leaders, and I'm looking forward to partnering with them on major economic projects like the one we're proposing, where there's going to be a very large benefit to.
Alberta hasn't left Canada, not yet. But if Smith succeeds in pulling multiple provinces into constitutional talks, she'll set a precedent Ottawa can't control. Provinces deciding for themselves how much power they'll give to the federal government and how much they'll keep. Smith calls it a return to true provincial independence. Ottawa calls it a direct threat to national unity. The real question isn't whether these talks will happen. They're already in motion. The question is this: if Alberta succeeds, who's next? Saskatchewan, Manitoba, even British Columbia? And when that day comes, will Canada still be a united country? Or just a fragile patchwork of provinces quietly pulling apart, one constitutional meeting at a time?
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says a proposal for a new oil pipeline in Canada is highly likely.
Look, the bottom line is a new east-west coast pipeline in Canada is good for Canadians. It's good for world markets in that we have access to more supply.
But for the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is heading overseas.
As President Trump ramps up tariffs against Canada, Ottawa is responding, not with speeches or countermeasures, but with something far more strategic. For the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is being shipped directly to Asia, bypassing the United States entirely. At the same time, a new cross-country pipeline is being fast-tracked. It's not retaliation, it's leverage, and it could reshape the balance of power in North America's energy and trade relationship. In early July, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney confirmed what many had suspected. Canada is moving ahead with a proposed pipeline connecting Alberta's oil fields to the Pacific coast. This east-west pipeline would allow Canadian oil to bypass American refineries entirely, a strategic shift at a time when U.S. tariffs are rising. According to former U.S. Energy Secretary Dan Brouillette, Canada's push is more than economic. It's political. With American refiners buying most of Canada's oil, the country has long been boxed in. This pipeline could change that. But oil isn't the only focus. In British Columbia, LNG Canada has now shipped its first cargo of liquefied natural gas to North Asia. The $40 billion project, the largest private investment in Canadian history, has capacity for 14 million tons annually, and it could double. Suddenly, Canada is no longer just exporting energy to the United States. It's entering the global market.
Well, as you know, it addresses two key priorities for the Carney government. One, trade diversification, which is the new mantra in response to Trump's tariffs. So it fits into that. It also fits into the other objective of Canada becoming an energy superpower.
Why does this matter now? Because nearly 97% of Canada's oil and gas exports still go to the U.S. That's been a long-standing vulnerability. It means lower prices, less production, and no access to rising demand overseas. But LNG is shifting that. Asia now accounts for over 70% of global LNG demand. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and China are looking to cut coal use and need reliable natural gas. Canada, with its Pacific coastline, has a key advantage. A tanker from British Columbia reaches Asia in half the time it takes from the U.S. Gulf Coast. That means Canada can compete and win. If this shift continues, Canada could significantly reduce its reliance on American buyers. And in a trade negotiation, that matters. It changes the power dynamic. Because if Trump continues to use tariffs as pressure, Canada now has an option. Redirect supply away from the U.S., not just in theory, but in real volume. This is no longer a bluff. It's infrastructure in motion.
North Asia story. The project comes as Canada looks to diversify its trading relationships outside of the U.S.
The United States might be the world's top oil producer, with a record 13.4 million barrels per day in July 2025, according to the Energy Information Administration. But production is only one part of the equation. Delivery is another. America still faces challenges building the pipeline capacity needed to move that oil. It also relies heavily on stable imports from Canada to balance refining needs, especially in the Midwest and Northeast. If Canada cuts or diverts supply, U.S. refiners could face higher costs. Consumers could see higher fuel prices. Even more, industries tied to energy, like electric vehicles, heavy manufacturing, and construction, could feel the pressure. Canada's new LNG routes, if fully scaled, could also undercut future U.S. export ambitions. While the Trump administration promotes its own Alaska LNG project, it's years behind. By the time American gas reaches Asia, Canadian cargo may already be there. Trump's tariffs were meant to corner Canada, but they may have pushed it to finally break free. Pipelines and LNG terminals don't respond to tweets. They reshape long-term leverage. And this time, it's Canada laying down the infrastructure, not just the rhetoric. As natural gas flows westward and oil bypasses old routes, the question isn't whether Trump will escalate. It's whether the U.S. is ready for a trade war where energy is the counterpunch.
President Trump ratcheting up the tariff war with a measure that could be another big blow to Canada. Donald Trump announced a 50% tariff on copper.
Of course, our embassy in Washington is following very closely, as well as the entire team back in Ottawa.
On July 9th, President Donald Trump announced a new 50% tariff on all copper imports into the United States. The policy takes effect August 1st and has already sent shockwaves through global supply chains. But while much of the world is reacting with uncertainty, one neighbor isn't panicking. Canada isn't shouting, it's watching. Because for Ottawa, this isn't just another tariff. It's a test of strategy and of how far Trump is willing to go before Canada decides to push back. In 2023, Canada exported 9.3 billion Canadian dollars worth of copper and copper-based products, according to Statistics Canada. Over half, about 4.8 billion, went to the United States. That trade now sits on the edge of a cliff. Canadian producers fear that if no exemption is reached, their products will become instantly uncompetitive compared to US-based suppliers. Some Canadian exporters, especially those who shifted into copper during earlier rounds of US metal tariffs, now find themselves back under threat. For businesses that rely on the US for a fifth of their sales, the prospect of a 50% tariff could mean lost contracts, layoffs, or even full market exit. This isn't an abstract policy debate. It's the real cost of losing access to a partner that, for decades, served as Canada's largest customer for critical minerals.
If you were to ask Donald Trump that question, I guess he would say he's answered it today in his Truth Social post that he wants to rebuild the American copper industry.
Trump's reasoning is clear: rebuild America's industrial base. In a social post, he framed copper as vital to the future, powering everything from electric vehicles to military systems and data centers. But unlike aluminum or steel, the U.S. still relies heavily on foreign copper. It takes years to build new smelters or expand mining operations. In the short term, manufacturers will face higher prices, and consumers may feel the effects in products that touch nearly every part of modern life. To Canada, this doesn't look like industrial policy. It looks like leverage, a pressure tactic to bring negotiating partners to the table. And the deadline, August 1st, is now a countdown clock for everyone involved.
Being said, every single journalist in the country wants to have more information about the negotiations. The same. We will let the Prime Minister do the negotiation, supported, of course, by our negotiator-in-chief back in Washington, Kirsten Holman, and we will not negotiate in public.
Yet Canada isn't moving publicly. Not yet. Industry Minister Melanie Joly says there is still no executive order, but confirms that Ottawa and the Canadian Embassy in Washington are following very closely. Prime Minister Mark Carney has not responded publicly, a pattern that reflects his cautious, behind-the-scenes style. Canada's lead negotiator, Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, is working in Washington to secure an outcome before the window closes. The government's focus, Joly says, is on protecting workers and supporting companies at the front line of this trade war, from aluminum and steel now to copper. Canada's goal is simple: secure a carve-out, a specific exemption for copper under a broader bilateral agreement. It's not unprecedented. Canada has achieved similar deals in the past. But this time, the pressure is higher. The self-imposed deadline is July 21st. That gives Carney's team less than 2 weeks to finalize a trade and security agreement with the U.S. before the tariffs hit. Donald Trump's strategy is loud: The announcements come via social media, the targets are clear, and the deadlines are firm. Canada's strategy is quieter, but not weaker. Every move is measured. Every response is calculated. As August 1st approaches, the world will watch whether Canada bends or negotiates its way out. In this trade war, timing is power. And while Trump holds the microphone, Carney is holding the clock.